Actually, there's like 1 in 6 households in the United States owns an RV. It's massive.
Seriously?
Yeah. As you go deeper, integrating into one side of the marketplace, whether it's supply or demand, you actually can create better liquidity within the marketplace. It's a beautiful business, right? When you can get the supply side to bring the customers to you and you can monetize it. I think that's one of the really like sweet qualities of this marketplace plus model. If you can pull it off, people always tell you like, oh, some big guy will do what you're doing. And it's like, the fact of the matter is like most of the time they don't. One, because the opportunity cost is way too big for them to do that. But 2, they are not incentivized like internally to build that muscle. Probably websites are going to decline dramatically in terms of like visiting and usage and become less important. Liquidity comes from specificity. And by liquidity, I mean like your probability of making a match between supply and demand goes up the more specific you can be. Don't go low. Like
Say
that's
more.
The number one. That's the don't start low because it's hard to go up.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. Today's guest is Colin Gardiner, general partner at Yonder VC, where he focuses on backing marketplace startups with real traction, real monetization strategies, and hopefully not so imaginary unit economics. I don't know why I went into that television voice. Before launching Yonder, Colin was a product leader at Outdoorsy, the peer-to-peer RV rental marketplace you didn't know was massive. We kicked things off with what he learned at building a marketplace for RVs, what surprised him about the supply side, and why the real unlock wasn't casual users. It was power hosts obsessed with utilization and yield using the SaaS tool they gave away. We then dive into one of Colin's core investing frameworks, the Marketplace Plus model. I love this. He walks us through how SaaS layers, bolt-on services, and professional tooling can turn a marketplace from a nice UX into a full-blown operating system. But he also shares where that strategy can go too far, like when platforms start taking inventory on or drift into fully managed models that break the business model. Then it's all about monetization, take rates, pricing psychology, advertising layers, data sales, and when to blend in elements like tech-enabled services or agent-led supply. That's a new one. Colin shares how he advises founders to avoid overfitting for margin at the expense of product market fit, and why some of the best monetization plays don't look like revenue at first glance. And finally, we zoom out. Does every marketplace eventually have to quote-unquote pick a side? Is negative gross margin always a red flag? And how does distribution change in a world where SEO fades and AI reshapes discovery? All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. Did you know that around 40% of manually processed invoices contain errors, missing data, bad codes, duplicates? And those mistakes don't just slow your finance team down, they cost you money. That's why global finance automation matters. It's not just about saving time, it's about keeping your business safe from costly errors. And that's exactly what Tipalti does. Tipalti is the serious AP solution for serious business. Tipalti automates the end-to-end payables process, handling everything from onboarding suppliers to global payouts. all so your finance team can breathe again. More than 5,000, of the world's most ambitious businesses already rely on Tipalti to make payments in over 200 countries and 120 currencies. With baked-in security and tax compliance, Tipalti gives you the confidence to scale globally without adding extra finance headcount. Give your finance team their time back. Don't let bad invoices drain good money. Visit tipalti.com/runthenumbers. Tipalti.com/runthenumbers. Tipalti, serious AP for serious business. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. So I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. And so I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com. aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. Colin, thanks for joining me on the pod.
Great to have me here, CJ. I'm excited to do it.
It was so much fun to go down a rabbit hole on everything marketplaces in your newsletter. So thanks for writing that.
Yeah, of course. I'm just doing what I love.
I'm like a guy running around with a hammer looking for a nail. I've had this factoid in my brain for like 2 years. I haven't had an opportunity to break it out yet. So you started your marketplace career, I believe, as a product leader and also go-to-market leader at Outdoorsy, which is the largest peer-to-peer marketplace for RVs. From what I've gathered, there are more RVs registered in the United States currently than there are electric cars on the road.
Not surprised. I think actually there's like 1 in 6 households in the United States owns an RV. It's massive.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I grew up around major cities, Boston. Now I'm kind of in the New York area. I've lived kind of near Miami and stuff. And I think we just take for granted how many people in the US don't live in a major metropolis where you can charge your car. And then we also take for granted how much space there is out there to go camping and actually do shit outdoors.
Yeah. I mean, I think RVing is one of those things that just, one of the things I look for in investing and just my time, but also money is what I call these sneaky large TAMs where things just for whatever reason, they're in a blind spot. Optically, they don't look good to most people, but they're just surprisingly large. And I think those are the things that get me excited. And why I joined Outdoorsy was again, 1 in 6 households owns an RV. And the other interesting thing was if you go to Sand Hill Road or just Palo Alto in general and go drive down there and raise some money, you'll see homeless people living in RVs all along the street there. And so as if you're a VC there and someone comes pitching is hey, we're going to rent out RVs. They're thinking, oh yeah, that homeless guy in the RV over there renting that sounds great, right? So I think there was just this cognitive dissonance in raising for that business that, we had to overcome, one, but also made it just not that competitive, it's just, anyway, it was an interesting little quality of that business.
Are there any other quirky or feature specific things about running a marketplace for something as specific for RVs that people from the outside wouldn't realize?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the RV category is there's really 2 types of inventory. One that is motorized, that you drive at the wheel, and the second is towable inventory. And so what's really interesting, motorized, anyone can do with a driver's license, right? But what's interesting about towable is that not anyone can just rent and tow something. They actually need to have a vehicle that has tow capacity. And so as you think about the country as a whole, people that live in large cities or, near the metropolis like you may, they might have a Tesla or like a smaller sedan or something like that. Like you can't tow a 2,000-pound trailer on them, which is like a pretty common trailer size. And so what's ended up being really interesting is like that asset, that category is really much more prevalent and dominant in places like the Midwest and Texas where, people have trucks or SUVs and things that can tow things. So I think one of the interesting parts about that whole business was that demographically, the demand was wildly different between the coasts than in the middle of the United States.
Oh, and then you got to figure out how to balance the supply and demand within these specific regions.
100%. I think Texas was like, this is probably dated now, but like was one of our only markets where trailer rentals were more than motorized rentals.
I have a friend who runs like it's equivalent of like Airbnb, but for dock slips. So what he's basically aggregated is like a series of virtual harbors if you were to put them all together. But he was describing to me like how he has to keep track of the inventory in like extremely specific ways of like how many feet wide is the dock? How deep is can you fit like the hull in there? Because like certain boats need like deeper dock slips. How many feet up to walk to like the house that it's at is it? And then do they have a gate that you can enter and exit? And like what times can you come and go? And so I've always found that part about marketplaces super fascinating because it's kind of like a moat that if you're not like totally for the cause and are willing to go to like the nth detail to make it work for somebody and make it 10 times better, like it keeps all the generic people out who try to do it on like the equivalent of like a Craigslist.
Totally. I think that's one of those like specifics that really matters. Like we saw this a lot for the equivalent of the dock slip is the campground site.
Oh yeah.
For an RV. Like not all campground sites are created equal and you can't just park any RV in any spot, right? And so every campground's got like specific dimensions, whether it's a pull through, there's all these different details. So that was like one of those things like as we got more and more in the space, like the deeper that you could go, the more customized you could be, just the better the experience was for everyone. 100% agreement. I mean, I think that's most marketplaces is liquidity comes from specificity. And by liquidity, I mean like your probability of making a match between supply and demand goes up the more specific you can be.
It can also grind in the opposite direction. I remember talking to somebody who worked at Thumbtack, and what they said is one of the options you could put was like if you were having a party and wanted a DJ there, you could click, oh, I want them to have a smoke machine. And like people would have just thrown it in like, oh, that sounds cool. I'll click that for a smoke machine. But what it did is it made the supply go from like, I'm just making it up, like 100 to like 4 within your area. And people didn't actually truly like give a shit about the smoke machine. They were just like doing it because like, what? Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. But like the overly specificity there actually degraded like the matching.
That's like maybe like an unintended consequence type of situation.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of other interesting stories from the Outdoorsy days, but those are the good ones so far.
And from what I gather, Colin, you built this SaaS layer that basically turned clipboards into systems of record for RV owners. I'm hoping you can walk through like this Marketplace Plus model and like how you actually did it like in the moment to make it work.
Yeah, I think it's a great one to dig into in a couple that. So just for defining what I call a Marketplace Plus model for everyone, and this is largely like what is my thesis behind my fund, Yonder, which invests in early stage marketplaces, is that the really successful marketplaces out there are marketplace plus something else. And that could be like a SaaS product, it could be a fintech product, insurtech, content, community, anything. The list goes on, right? Like it can be anything. But the whole point of it is that as you go deeper, integrating into one side of the marketplace, whether it's supply or demand, you actually can create better liquidity within the marketplace. And this usually shows up with system of record, right? Like one of the hardest parts about marketplaces is, hey, someone puts up a listing, doesn't update it, like their availability. We've all had this with Airbnbs. It's just really frustrating, right? Like people think they book something that's not actually available, and then it falls through and just destroys trust. And so what we did at Outdoorsy was actually went out and built a SaaS software for people that had fleets of RVs that were like renting them out on the side of the road and gave it to them for free and let them run their business on it. It's basically business in a box. And then we distributed their inventory onto the Outdoorsy marketplace. But what's nice about that is because they are running their business on that software, we had real-time rates and availability. Like we saw their calendar, we knew exactly what it was. This was like the system of record. And that was a huge advantage for us versus any competition we had because they didn't have that access. And so as you look into the vacation rental space, like who does really well, it's like who can actually integrate into the property managers and ultimately the channel managers to understand like the real-time rates and availability. And so that's what we call the a SaaS enabled marketplace, but I kind of more generalized into this idea of the marketplace plus model, marketplace plus SaaS, spring tech, so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it's a super powerful model. I think OpenTable is a good example, a company that did the same thing, reservation management system with a marketplace on top of it. If you think about Google, what is Google really? It's a search engine with an ads marketplace built into it. Even Gmail, it's a free tool plus an ads marketplace within it. Facebook ads marketplace with a free social layer. And so for me, it was like this big pattern kind of match and recognition that popped out to me. It was like, oh, look, actually like real value exchange and monetization usually comes from supply and demand and transaction and value creation. But to get people there, you usually got to offer them something else to kind of keep it sticky, retentive, and to keep it moving forward. And so there's the kind of the common phrase, like, come for the tool, stay for the community, kind of like phrasing. But I think that's all kind of service of saying that like, hey, if you can build something that gets in with users and retains them, you ultimately can layer on this kind of like transaction layer on top that captures real value. So we can do it more, but that's kind of my pattern.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And to drill into the OpenTable example, if I have it right, they basically created like a single player mode so they could do the like in-person analog reservations and also like the seating charts. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, they like flipped the switch to make it so it became a two-sided network where you could create the reservations online.
Exactly. I don't know the exact like, play-by-play timing of it, but that's exactly the point, is that, hey, we created a tool for restaurants to use to fulfill the need of like someone walks in, we need to sign them a table digitally and track it. And then it turns out, hey, once you have that insight and that availability, why don't we just open that up to anybody that wants to book through a website or anything like that? And so that model in general is something that gets me really excited. And I think builds some of the best marketplaces out there.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. A messy or missing cap table might not just slow you down, it could cost you your next fundraising round. VCs get flooded with pitches, and if your equity is confusing or missing, they'll move on fast. Fidelity Private Shares is an all-in-one equity management platform that helps you maintain a clean cap table, an organized data room, and a clear equity story. Schedule a demo at fidelityprivateshares.com, mention Mostly Metrics, and get 20% off. You just launched your new AI product. The new pricing page looks great. I'm talking crisp. But behind it, last-minute glued code, messy spreadsheets, and running ad hoc queries to figure out what to bill. Customers get invoices they can't understand. Engineers are chasing billing bugs. Finance can't close the books. Well, with Metronome, you hand it all off to the real-time billing infrastructure that just works. Reliable, flexible, and built to grow with you. They turn raw usage events into accurate invoices, give customers bills they actually understand, and keep every team in sync in real time. Whether you're launching usage-based pricing, managing enterprise contracts, or rolling out new AI services, Metronome does the heavy lifting so you can focus on your product, not your billing. That's why some of the fastest growing companies in the world like OpenAI and Anthropic run their billing on Metronome. Visit metronome.com to learn more. That's metronome.com. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Mercury, business banking for founders and finance pros who want their financial stack to actually work together. Now, I don't plug tools I don't know or intimately use. I've been a Mercury customer for a couple of years now. In fact, I showed the Mercury dashboard to their CFO, Daniel Kang, from their finance team right before we hit record on this episode. It felt like a full circle moment. And what I love most is that Mercury isn't just banking, it's operational confidence. I can send a wire to a podcast editor, I can check capital balances, and I can approve a payment for a freelancer who helped me with a tech stack report, all without bouncing across tabs or praying a PDF exported correctly. Mercury's making a bet on builders. Whether you're issuing your first invoice or wiring 7 figures for a warehouse build-out, it's banking that scales with your ambition. Visit Mercury.com to apply online in minutes and see why over 200,000, entrepreneurs choose Mercury to run their business finances smarter. Here comes my banking voice. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group, Column NA, Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. The IO card is issued by Patriot Bank, members FDIC, pursuant to a license from MasterCard. To steal a term from your newsletter, take rate, like there's this ability to make like supply legible, I think you called it, which is basically the ability to know that it's even there. And my favorite example of that is there's this tour and activity booking system called Fair Harbor. They were acquired by Booking.com. And I had a failed startup in the space that I was trying to work on top of it. But basically what they did is they went around to all like the whale watches in like Oahu. They went around to all the jet ski providers in Fort Lauderdale who were managing their businesses on pen and paper and said, we'll give you a free booking system and we'll also build you a website so people can find you. And so they gave it away completely for free. And then they made like 7% on each booking, which is a pretty high take rate from the tourist who's in the area and is willing to spend money. So I always thought that was a really cool example of like the plus model.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of examples, successful businesses there that have done that. I think one that comes to mind is a company called Campground Booking, founder and Heath Paget. Basically, they gave away free campground booking software to the campgrounds to like, hey, bring your campground online, take online bookings. Because normally many of them just do it over the phone, and like literally the day that like they open, they get like inundated with calls to book up for the summer. And so what they did is they just allowed them to take bookings online, and they just put a small fee to essentially the demand side, and that essentially pays for the software. And it's a beautiful business, right? When you can get the supply side to bring the customers to you, and you can monetize it. I think that's one of the really like sweet qualities of this marketplace plus model, if you can pull it off, is that you can kind of what I call weaponize the supply, where you get them to essentially do all the work for you. And you look at like Whatnot, this is exactly what they did. They provided this live streaming and selling capability to people. And then those people brought their audiences in. Those audiences flipped horizontally to buy stuff, and flywheel began to spin.
Colin, to go back to something important you said, you honed in on like this professionalized sector of RV rentals. Why was that so important?
Yeah, I think one of the core insights, at least for me, that I've seen over and over again, and imagine other people have too, is that peer-to-peer marketplaces professionalize over time. Why that is that it's not so much fun to rent out your apartment and then realize you don't like doing it, it becomes a job. And then all of a sudden, you don't want to do it anymore and you take it off. And that leaves all the people essentially that do like doing it and go, hey, how do I do this bigger? How do I get more properties? How do I get more RVs? How do I get more cars? And so there's this whole professionalization element that happens in marketplaces, specifically peer-to-peer ones. The other thing that I think is very important for like chicken and the egg type situations is like, just go after people doing what you're doing already and get them to come on your platform. And so that's kind of why we went after professionals, was like, hey, look, it's trench warfare to add individual RV owners one by one. Like it's just a highly unscalable. CAC is really hard, like until you get the lights on with enough supply and like enough, it looks like there's a party going. It's very hard to get like economies of scale on acquiring on the peer-to-peer side. But what you can do is you can go out and acquire professionalized supply already. And the best part about those folks is they're doing this as a business. And so they have a high quality standard. Typically, they're usually taking online bookings. They want to make money, right? So they're in the business of maximizing value. Whereas people that are more like peer-to-peer folks aren't necessarily in the business of maximizing. They may not want to rent out their house over the 4th of July or any long weekend because they're using it, right? They may just want to rent it during the middle of the week when you may get people or you may not. And so I think that was a big part for us, was going after those people and making sure that we could add a really high quality liquid supply up front.
And then there's also high signal that you have product market fit when people who didn't have a business doing that before, like start one. We were talking to Chuck Fisher, the CFO of Turo, the peer-to-peer car rental marketplace. And he's like, there's some dude in the LA area that has a fleet of 1,500 cars on Turo. I was like, you're kidding me.
I'm not surprised. I mean, we saw the same thing in the RV space. There's people just either consigned or, ended up kind of figuring out how to like chain loans, like they just really, people will do it, right? Like if there's real money there and they're like have an advantage, they're going to take it. They're going to do it. I think one of the interesting things is how as a platform you enable that. And one of the things that we did really early on was, one, the software for them to run their business on, which was critical. Just give them the free software. It's great, right? But 2 was insurance. And saying very similar for Turo, for motorized vehicles, you have to have insurance. It's just statutory. So what was really, insightful to us is that a lot of policies out there that people were using actually were personal policies for their own RV. They owned it and it didn't allow them to rent, but they were doing it anyway. And so one of our core insights was like, hey, we actually should build insurance policies that enable our business rather than say you can't do this. And so then on the fleet side, same thing. There was like sub policies out there, but it just turns out no one had really built a really custom policy around RV rental fleets. And so I know Turo's done the same thing there for these types of fleets. But the more you can do and go deeper with your customer on those things, the more you can lock them in on your platform, but also the more you can actually enable them to scale.
Damn, now we're cooking. All right, so this plus model along with the marketplace, you can give them SaaS, like a booking system. You can give them insurance. Can you think of anything else that you could bolt on or offer?
Oh, financing. The things that we've looked at in the past when I was there was like revenue-based financing, helps them purchase vehicles, things like that. Because, at the end of the day, like your nucleus of your business is supply, right? Like, how do we
That's what
get
Uber
more?
does for drivers. They'll help you buy a car.
Exactly. And so, I mean, that's another classic example. But if you think in like other, maybe more like construction marketplaces, like materials, like where they have essentially really large transaction sizes and people are going to need to like finance and factor those things, like that actually may be the thing you start with is like, hey, how do we actually create liquidity in this marketplace by financing these things at better rates than they could find elsewhere? And often like your plus can be your hook, right? I mean, that's like realistically what it should be, is like your hook into your business, and then you get people to transact on the platform. I also liken it can be another service too, right? So, it could be like free delivery. Or something like those. Like, three-sided marketplaces in a lot of ways are really just two-sided marketplaces with something being the liquidity factor. So you take like something like DoorDash, people talk about it as a three-sided marketplace. I kind of view it more as like actually a two-sided marketplace between people buying food and a restaurant selling food, and they're just providing delivery as a service in there.
Oh, that is interesting. Well, what's fascinating about these marketplace models is you gather more data on whoever your user is, and it ends up like giving you this unfair advantage to provide something. And so we were talking to the CFO of Olo, Peter Benavides, and he was saying that they have better data on the customer for like when you're not signed into like your accounts, when you're checking out as a guest. So it turns their payments from like a commodity service into something that's a huge value add, and you can actually charge more for it because it helps you make decisions across your whole company.
Yeah, I mean, the way I view it is if you can do the successful first layer of a marketplace, interact with complete strangers, that builds trust. And then it actually gives you the ability to essentially solve other problems for them. And this is what I call like the revenue Lego blocks of marketplaces. This is like what is so exciting about them, is that they're like, you can do one thing and then you can stack another discrete thing on top of it, and they all feed into each other. So at Outdoorsy, for example, is like we had Outdoorsy the marketplace, we stacked on the SaaS, then on top of both of those, we stacked on this insurance piece of it. And, I'm sure there's more things to come in that, but the whole point is like, you can do all of these things to increase the revenue in a given marketplace. And if you look at, Uber, for example, they started just in, rideshare, and now they do, delivery, they do scooters, they do all kinds of mobility. And so the whole point is that there's these like revenue building blocks that you can do.
There is the temptation, though, I feel like, to go too far. And there's this line between like smart bolt-on services and then going to like fully managed models. I think like Open Door eventually just started like buying up all the houses. Or Hodinkee, if you're a watch fan, I think they took on inventory. So they started buying the watches. How do you know when to stop?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I love about marketplace is the asset light model. Like, like if you can do that, I think it's just incredibly valuable. I think what's interesting about this is like, I think Amazon's probably a good example of a company that hasn't gone too far, but has taken very good advantage of these things. Is I think there may be product or category sets that are good, like loss leader potential categories, or where economies of scale that you have could really drive value. So I look at like Amazon. What do I buy from like Amazon Basics? I buy the basics. That's why they call it that. Batteries, like shirts, like these are all like commodity items that benefit from huge scale. And so I think where people start to go wrong on these things is where they try to mistake, hey, I could do something because I have scale, with, hey, I could purchase something because I can make more margin on it than these other people. And then you start competing with your supply. And I think that ultimately is where you have to be really careful, right? Like if you're going to compete with your supply, it probably should be a kill shot. And if it's not, then you have real problems, right? Because you're just going to degrade trust in the whole platform. And I think holding inventory is really hard if that's not your core muscle.
I think like what you said about you either do it or you don't, like go for the kill shot if you're going to provide the inventory. But like that whole frenemy thing of like, hey, don't worry. Yeah, come work with us, but we're also going to eat some of your lunch. Like that just never flies.
Not in my experience. I think people are either like scared to death that you're going to take everything away from them, or they can compete with you because they have economies of scale. And then that's just a bad place to be. But yeah, I personally don't love these like fully like managed marketplaces that have a lot of like inventory risk. And you see this a lot in commodity marketplaces where they're kind of blind and they have to take on inventory essentially to kind of make the spread. And those can really like leave you open to a lot of risk. I think Fluxport's a good example, Convoy, all these, like they just had material commodity risks built into those models. And so I think if you essentially either hold inventory in those cases or just like have real exposure to price fluctuations, it's like it can be really hard to operate.
I might be conflating terms here, but is there a difference between a marketplace and a brokerage?
Yes. I think a lot of it is like a fine line, A marketplace to me would be like two independent parties like finding each other and transacting, right? Whereas like a broker is actually like matchmaking between the two. And so the broker's whole model is like a bit different. They're trying to like probably maximize some kind of value set of supply to a certain demand set, whereas a marketplace is probably more agnostic to what they're doing.
Yeah. All right. Well, one of my favorite topics to talk about is monetizing your business. And I know you're passionate about this particular term. How do you coach the startups that you work with on setting their initial take rate?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a great question. Don't go low. Like
Say
that's
more.
the number one. Don't start low because it's hard to go up. And it's hard to go up not because your customers won't let you. It's hard to go up because you're afraid to do it once you set it. And I think that's an important thing to understand is that if you can attenuate people to a certain like take rate in the market, it'll eventually become path dependent, and that will be what the market accepts. And so as I look at different marketplaces out there, like for investing, and it's like, what is the path dependency in that market already for monetization, right? Like, did it get normalized at single digit take rates, or did it get normalized at much higher take rate? And so like, if you look at like the travel space, it's kind of crazy that like hotel commissions for the OTAs is like 20%.
Yeah.
I mean, like, why is it 20%? Why can't it be lower, And it's because that was largely a lot of where the path dependency was set. And now it's just kind of standard and the expectation, and that most hotels and, brands are outsourced a lot of their marketing. And that's how they justify it. Whereas if you go to like commodity marketplaces, like there's no one's saying it has to be 20%, right? Like it probably would be much lower. Like it's very hard for some of these marketplaces to even eke out like a percent. They have to do high volume. And so I think a few things to think about as you do this is that there's a spectrum of like usage on your platform. And so as usage goes up, take rate tends to be lower in some sense, not perfectly correlated, but as you go to like lower frequency, which also tends to be higher AOV items, you tend to have to take a higher take rate because you need to be more profitable per transaction. And you're really probably profitable on your first transaction. Whereas like higher repeat rate purchases, you can potentially take lower transaction amount in terms of the take rate and build it up over time. So just kind of an interesting like way to think about it. It's not like perfect, but I still would say people should start higher. I see a lot of people saying, hey, we're going to start at like 5 or 10% and then we'll work our way up. And it's the fact of the matter is that once you get people going, you get scared to change it. And often I've told this to founders many times that just increase it. And honestly, it won't be that bad. And they usually hem and haw for 6 months and then do it. And they go, oh, that wasn't that bad. And the reason it's not bad is that most small, like when you're small as a startup and you're scaling, if you're growing 40, 50% month over month on certain things, turns out the majority of the people that knew your pricing are going to be like diluted in 2 months anyway, because you're going to have doubled your size, right? So it's just like, that's kind of how our framework feels. Like you're just going to grow so fast, it doesn't matter. You're going to like outgrow those people that knew that pricing anyway. So you might as well just start high in the first place and get like really good product market fit signal, because discount rates like ultimately are you doing yourself no favors, because you're actually masking like my willingness to use your platform because it's cheap with actual product market fit.
We've spoken to a couple leaders who were there when Uber was going through finding the water level with their take rate over time. And you nailed it, Colin. For the net new users, they had like grandfathered in the older ones, but for the net new ones, it was like 5% higher of what they would take from the drivers.
Yeah, I mean, again, like hyper growth can hide a lot of sins. I fundamentally believe that. So take advantage of that fact or, feature of your business.
Do you think that there are more marketplaces out there than people realize that are actually charging both sides of the equation in a transaction?
In some way, like even if one side is only getting charged something, like event, you are paying in some way for it, right?
It
On
gets
both
passed
sides.
on to you sometimes.
Yeah. It's funny is like, he'll call it the sharing economy, right? And that's because both sides pay. It's more of a joke, but, I think increasingly what I'm seeing as more B2B marketplaces come around, traditionally we've seen a lot of consumer marketplaces, right? Those are the big names, but we're seeing more and more kind of B2B marketplaces get to scale. And those have a bit different flavor. Honestly, the supply side may view it more as a traditional marketing channel or sales distribution channel. And so they're willing to treat it a little bit differently, and maybe a transaction plus a like membership fee or marketing fee to be involved. So like I think that you would never see that in a consumer marketplace, really. Like I don't, like for the most part. So it just really depends, I think, on the flavor of your business too and where you're operating. But if you're in straight up consumer, like usually it's pretty common to take a little bit from the demand side, a little bit from the supply side. And you may see that differently in other industries.
And you can boost your effective take rate like through different monetization methods. So when I was at Parts Tech, we were a marketplace for aftermarket car parts. So like you need new brake pads, new air filter. We would get a percentage take rate from the supplier on every transaction. And then we would double up with the garages who were ordering by selling them a SaaS product. So it wasn't a percentage, but it was, $50 a month or whatever. And if you kind of do the math, it's like, well, your effective take rate is like twice as high for those customers.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to blend it too. I mean, there's probably infinite ways to monetize a marketplace, right? And I think one of the things that a lot of people kind of get hung up on is like, do we just do transactions?
Yeah.
Right. And like,
I'm so glad you brought that up because there are marketplaces like Uber, Instacart, and DoorDash. And if you look at what's publicly available, they're now relying heavily on advertising. So I'm wondering, Colin, if you think that every marketplace eventually becomes an ad business at scale.
I don't know about every one of them, but it certainly is like fairly common. I think what you end up seeing is that they always have the transaction layer to this, but that as you get scale, people are willing to advertise to find people on your platform, right? As like a discovery mechanism. And so I think it's just a natural extension of like having essentially done demand aggregation well, is that people will pay for access to it. Because marketplaces in general, like I call it the long short strategy of marketplaces, is that the short is you need to acquire really valuable and unique supply that people can't get anywhere else, ideally. And then once you've done that and you're matching it to demand, you need to become the best at aggregating demand for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you'll die. And so as you look at all the platforms that have done really well, it's ones that have aggregate demand really well, right? Like Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, they're just, just juggernauts when it comes to those things. And so Airbnb is probably the only one that doesn't have advertising on it that I'm aware of. It's like all those other ones are just now paying for access to customers, essentially.
I've always found it fascinating how Upwork manages to get the supply side to pay for advertising to like boost like how they show up in the results.
I'm not surprised. I mean, super, like I cut my teeth a lot in travel. And so like advertising is just a thing, right? I think if you want to be at the top of results and you haven't, like to be able to make that work, you have to have enough competition and it's sufficiently hard enough for people to get to the top of search that people will want to pay for it. So there's some dynamics there. I don't think advertising is like a day one strategy people should go after because there's just no need.
And you can also degrade the user experience if you don't do it right.
100%.
A company, well, I guess it kind of is a marketplace now, a social media company, Meta, Facebook, like Facebook Marketplace blows my mind with how big it is. I think it would, I don't know, I'm just making it up here. I think it would be one of the top 5 biggest marketplaces in the world if you could break it out. Do you think it's under monetized relative to its scale?
Probably. I mean, like, I think definitely. And I guess it's in how you monetize it, right? I mean, I think Meta has very much looked at it as like an ad play. Where do we get more surface area for ads, right? And I think at the end of the day, there's just many different ways to go about doing it. Like, there's plenty of businesses out there, OfferUps of the world, the Acquired Let Go, Craigslist. Like, there's plenty of other ways people make money, whether it's for pay per job listing or, different things on it. And they haven't pulled those levers probably because they're highly profitable and everything else they do. And they're just using it in some sense as a loss leader to bring in just people and in commercial intent.
It is fascinating how some social networks become marketplaces and some marketplaces become social networks.
I guess I'm not surprised by that. I think that's like part of the like marketplace plus kind of piece of this is like either you find that you've got traction on your marketplace and that you're seeing that you really, to do this better and get more scale, you need to go deeper into one side of it, right? Which ends up being a social network of sorts, or you're a social network that needs to figure out how to monetize and you need to find commercial intent. And you try to layer that on top of it.
You'd mentioned earlier, Colin, like buying commodity stuff like batteries or like t-shirts from Amazon and like getting their brand. It's kind of like the Costco Kirkland brand. Like I have no doubt that if Facebook or TikTok shifted from selling ads to selling products, people would buy them directly.
I'm not in disagreement. Like I think this is one of those things where it's really more about like what's your muscle, like as a company, like what do you actually fit to do? Yeah. Right. And I think that's like what it comes down to is that, like one of the things I hear a lot from people is like, oh, you're building this thing as a new player in this space. What if so-and-so, the big guy, does exactly this and just wipes you out? And there's always that risk. Right. But I think that risk really is only acute if you're playing in the same, or you're using the same strength that someone else has. Just use muscular terms. Like, for example, hey, I'm building this like AI tooling that OpenAI could do. Well, it turns out like I'm competing on the software layer that they're competing on, right? And like, yeah, they could blow me out of the water. But if I was doing something different than them, like that they couldn't replicate really easily because it was like a modality change, those things are actually much more defensible than people think. I don't know. I think about that a lot with these different things because people always tell you like, oh, some big guy will do what you're doing. And it's like, the fact of the matter is like most of the time they don't. One, because the opportunity cost is way too big for them to do that. But two, they are not incentivized like internally to build that muscle. And it's very hard to turn those incentivizations around.
I guess one example of when it wasn't a shit moment, they are going to do this, is when Google turned on Google Flights.
Yes and no. I mean, have any of those businesses gone out of business?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it maybe takes away from some of like Flight Radar or some of the others, but like
probably Kayak, Skyscanner were probably the biggest casualties. I think though that whole meta search CPC model in general was hard to sustain over time, mostly because to make that mix work, you have to have like a high amount of brand and organic traffic. And to your point, if Google soaks up most of the organic and brand side, your CPCs degrade because of the intent going down.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we're now living in an age where you can get one boxed like pretty quickly instead of having to scroll down. And you saw a lot of these marketplaces, particularly Booking.com, like they made a killing. They would basically outbid boutique hotels for their own like keywords. How does that strategy change in channel for distribution with AI?
Yeah, I mean, look, if I had the crystal ball, I would I'd be doing that right now. I think a Substack article needs to be written on this by me. But the way I've been thinking about this, maybe a few layers deeper. You as a marketplace are in the business of displaying essentially your available supply and making it available to demand. And what do I know to be true now? LLMs and mostly like AI kind of interfaces are increasingly taking up the share of my time on my browser. And I don't go to as many websites as I used to. Sure. I actually spend the majority of my time in a little chat interface. And what that means to me is that like probably websites are going to decline dramatically in terms of like visiting and usage and become less important. And what that means though is that the interfaces will be taking that information and displaying it in their own UI somehow. And they have their own way of like doing that, whether like they want it as like JSON or structured in this way. Like there's certain advantages like to doing it right so that they can present you correctly. And so as I think about marketplaces, I think the bigger thing we're going to start to see is that people like Booking.com or, you're already seeing this with Shopify, is they're going to make themselves like the MCP framework, they're going to make themselves available almost as like a headless marketplace. They're going to say, look, the demand side's actually going to be using these interfaces. And due to that, like we actually don't need to put as much time and effort into our front end of our business as we do onto the back end of it. And so I think that's like a really kind of important thing to think about in the long run, is that the demand side of the equation is going to get usurped and owned at these like chat levels.
And then on the back end, how you like find the discovery. I'm curious what you think about this concept of like AI agents helping with the matchmaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's already happening. Like, I mean, it's just I mean, I use it quite a bit with like tools like Manus. Now Claude has an agent version of, OpenAI is theirs. And you can like send it to do like, hey, find me an Airbnb XYZ. And it works pretty darn well. And so it's already available. It's already happening. It's just not currently, I would say you have to like set it off, right? You have to tell it, go do this, right? It's not preemptive. And I think that's the next layer we're going to see is like, how do the agents graduate from, reactive state to being proactive? And that was kind of my bigger thesis is like these marketplaces that can get quickly into this state where agents do proactive work for you and matching supply and demand are going to be really successful. And you already see this with like CRMs. We're starting to do a lot of this where it's like, it goes out and finds people in your network that had a change or wrote a cool piece of content, tells you a comment. Like when the technology can help you do something, right, and match the supply and demand and intent, like that's where the real magic is.
And that's different than matchmaking in the traditional sense, right? Can you just maybe
into
that a bit?
So there's like 4 different types of marketplaces. There's a double commit marketplace where you and I both list, or you and I are both on the website. I'm like, hey CJ, I want to rent your RV, and you're like, okay, great, I'll allow you to do it. So it's like a double commit, like we have to do. Then there's supply side pick, where CJ, you put up your RV for rent, someone finds it and books it. So that's the Airbnb model today. Then there's the supply side pick model is Uber. Hey, I need a ride. And then a driver decides to take my fare or not. So that's the demand, the supply side pick. And then there's what's traditionally been very difficult to do, which is the marketplace pick model, which is the marketplace picks the supply and demand match. And I think that is what you're going to increasingly see from AI, is that you're going to move towards these marketplaces where it's a marketplace pick model versus the traditional model where I would just put up essentially like an ad for people to come and pick out. And that's a very reactive state, not a proactive state.
Do you think the agents themselves could actually become the supply in some models?
100%, already happening. Like if you were in the business of like Upwork or Fiverr, you can tell where like their CEOs are telling their employees they should be scared, right? Because their supply can be digitized. And that has so many implications, and I don't think we fully understand what that means. Casey Winters, former Eventbrite CPO, he has a new marketplace called SuperMe, which essentially makes avatars of people like you and me that people will interact with and ask questions. And it's like fully democratizes you for 24 hours a day. And that just is a total paradigm shift for how you think about labor.
If I think about like a Fiverr or like an Upwork, it would be pretty nuts if you could be like, hey, I want to match with an AI agent that'll just edit my podcast or that just like make these PowerPoint slides. Like there's not actually a physical person on the other end. It's like they've created the inventory, which like brings us full circle to like, how do you know when you've gone too far and now you are the supply?
I mean, isn't that crazy? I mean, like
Wow.
Gamma, is like, makes slide decks for people. But imagine like, here's what I think you'll see is like discrete agents, I think are going to get wiped out by generalized agents that are really good at a thing. So you may find that like these like different slide companies may actually end up being the supply, powering the supply in a unique way for a given person that may add their color on top of it. So I think there's going to be this like move towards essentially people kind of like productizing the AI so that people like you and me could actually customize it and use it in a specific way to sell it.
Yeah. I want to hit on the investing lens for a sec here. So you get more at-bats than I do to look at some great companies out there. And we have a lot of guests on the podcast, and they bring up how a lot of these AI companies have negative gross margins. So they're making revenue, but they're actually like trading $1 for 75 cents each time. I've seen what you've written on like the makings of product market fit are like having two strangers pay for something. Like it results in revenue in some way. But like, how do you think about the gross margin of a marketplace when they're just starting out? Like, is negative gross margin like a bug or a feature?
I mean, in marketplaces, a lot of time it's just more of an economy of scale feature that, it's just basically, if you think about acquiring customers, both on the supply and demand side, the cost of acquiring supply at the beginning is the most expensive and it decays over time, like dramatically. What my experience, supply, you usually end up stop paying for it at scale because you have such a large network effect to bring the supply on, or you're very selective about it. So your CAC goes much closer to zero. Whereas the demand side usually goes the other way. It's usually, near zero at first because you're getting word of mouth, things like that, and then scales over time. What happens is if you think of an LTV to CAC equation, maybe a two-sided one where you're considering both the supply and demand, is that your supply cost is usually fixed, right, at the time of acquisition. Really what makes you more or less profitable is how well you can control the CAC of your demand side. And because it's really that ratio of like the contribution margin of the demand side, like per transaction basis, that dictates your ultimate LTV to CAC ratio over time. So that's kind of how I think it is. Like in theory, it should improve over time, right? As you essentially get more economies of scale. But those economies of scale don't usually come from better like acquisition costs on the demand side. It usually comes from I actually make more money per transaction because I improve my bottom line on the margin side. Like I get better at controlling costs on payments. I get better at controlling costs on like insurance, like all the different things that you go into your making a transaction happen. You usually get economies of scale to drive those down.
That makes a lot of sense, because there were a lot of critics saying that even marketplaces at scale, you look at an Uber or a DoorDash, when capital was so cheap, they were propped up where you could give away these crazy rebates and referrals. Like, how do you think about the different stages you go to and when like water finally finds its level?
Yeah, I mean, I have you seen Uber's free cash flow these days? I mean,
It's huge now. It's like they just flip the switch.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think people conflated like marketplaces using lots of capital with marketplaces require a lot of capital. I think the fact is that during the period that was happening was that capital was flush. And so if you think about the tactics that are available to you as an entrepreneur to grow, like you're going to go on the water goes on the path of least resistance, right? And so if your path of least resistance to growth is just raising money, of course you're going to do it, right? Like, I mean, if someone's willing to give you tons of money for like relatively like low like amounts of diligence, then it makes sense to use that for growth because it's pretty inexpensive, especially if you can do it at high valuation. But if that goes away, then of course you're going to go try to figure out how to grow a different way. Bootstrapping and monetization seems like a much better way to go. And so I think it's just really more of a feature of like the resourcing available at a given time than it is actually anything else. And you see this with these AI companies. Of course, they're going to raise a lot of money and sell at negative gross margins because they can. It's a very logical conclusion to go raise tons of money at high valuations with low dilution and use that money to prop up growth. I'm not surprised.
I love that, because it's not endemic of like the marketplace model. It's like even enterprise SaaS companies did the same thing. It's like any business that could get the capital was doing it, not that you needed it necessarily.
I mean, look at the housing market. Like when rates were low and money was cheap, everyone was buying houses. Like now that it's more expensive, people aren't buying houses. I mean, it's just a supply and demand. It's a marketplace of like allocation of capital that happens and is driven by like largely by interest rates. So that's how I think about it.
Last one I got for you, Colin. Do you think that every marketplace needs to have an inherent tilt to it, that it's like it's 1A is either the supply or demand, you have to lean in one direction or the other?
At different times, this kind of goes back to my long short strategy. At different times you got different 99 problems. And I think for me, like the way I see it is that typically supply is usually a nearer term, like closer to founding problem than demand is. And demand usually becomes the long-term problem. Just always, like, how do you scale? And there is a constraint factor in all this, right? Like, if you look at Outdoorsy, getting the number, you're not going to get 1 in 6 households with an RV in the country to list their RV on the platform. And it turns out most people don't want to rent something that is more than 10 years old, right? And so as you start to winnow down into like, here's the rentable supply, you'll find, well, actually it's pretty constrained, right? But you also find that your utilization rate on it isn't 100%. And so as you think about that, you're like, okay, well, it's really about demand at the end of the day, because I can drive up my utilization rate within all of this, even though it is constrained significantly. That's how I think about it a lot.
I just feel like some marketplaces find themselves in a stage where they're trying to be everything to everyone. And you kind of got to choose, like, when push comes to shove, we are pro this side or that side. It doesn't mean you don't love the other side. It just means that you're prioritizing them. Honestly, it becomes like part of your branding. I think that helps you attract more of that side.
But most of the branding is probably a reflection of which side they need to acquire. And as I look at like a lot of, I should say mostly consumer driven marketplaces, is like most of the advertising goes into the demand side. Right. I think, it's been a long time in my mind since Airbnb's real like push was on getting hosts. If anything, they're trying to make sure they have high quality hosts at this point.
Yeah.
So,
That's a champagne problem at that point.
Always.
Colin, this has been an absolute blast. I love talking marketplace models. Congrats on all the success, but where can people find you?
People can find me on Substack. I'm writing my newsletter Take Rate at GardnerColin.com. They can also check out my fund website, Yonder VC, if they want to learn more about the fund that I'm raising. It's my first fund focused on pre-seed marketplaces, closing here in December, which is exciting.
Nice.
And then LinkedIn and Twitter. That's or X. Sorry, messed it up.
I still call
Elon.
it Twitter. You can't change me.
Agreed.
Well, thanks, man. This has been a blast.
Thank you for having me.
Run the Numbers is a mostly media production. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by Meg D'Alessandro. Show is executive produced by Ben Hillman. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog way too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses. LOL. If you like this podcast, hit subscribe and give us 5 stars. It will take like 2 seconds and our algorithm overlords love it. Drink water, call your mom, and have a great day. Peace.